Greetings, welcome, Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name's Saqib, I'm your host. I hope you're well and in the best of health. In today's podcast, we'll be talking to Dr. Ibrahim Jaffe, who is a physician, Sufi master, spiritual guide, and has been given the title of Murshid Rabbi Ruhi by the late Sidi Sheikh Muhammad Jamal from Palestine. And he's the founder of the Institute of Spiritual Healing, University of Sufism, and the Marifah Foundation. And we'll be talking to him about his journey through spiritual healing, being a physician, and what Sidi taught him in terms of Sufi healing. And we'll also be speaking to Samah Ross, who has been a student of Sufism for more than 20 years. She holds a master's degree in divinity from the University of Spiritual Healing and Sufism, and also a master in French literature. And before she retired, she worked for some 30 years in government and industry as a global leadership consultant, trainer and coach. And we talked to her about what brought her to the Sufi path, the Shadli path, and that of the work of spiritual healing, and what her background was as well. The two of them will inshallah be running a workshop in Oxford in the UK between the 10th of November 2023 and Sunday the 12th of November. So I'll put more details on the Hikmah Project website if you are interested. In terms of updates, inshallah we will be looking to run some courses in the near future on the Fusus of Ibn Arabi with some classical commentaries like that of Gaisari and Abdul Ghani Nabulsi. So if you would like to get involved or have suggestions on study circles or courses you would like, then please do get in touch. Email the hikmahproject@gmail.com. So without further ado, here's the podcast.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله Ibrahim Rasulullah Musa Rasulullah Isa Rasulullah alayhi salatullah. Amen. Amen. Amen.
Dr. Jaffe, Samah, welcome to the Hikmah Project podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alhamdulillah, it's a wonderful honor for me to be interviewing and talking to you today. Something I've been really looking forward to for some time.
It's our pleasure to be with you. We're happy to speak with you. So,
Alhamdulillah. So what I would like to do is, having read your book, Dr. Jaffe, is just to start off with the time before you meet Sidi, your spiritual guide. And so you're a trained physician. You noticed this incident in the ward in which there was an incurable disease, and you saw how people were using a traditional way of healing. And then that presumably started you off on your journey to spiritual healing. Which traditions and which teachers did you study with?
Yeah, those are good questions. There's a little backstory which you don't maybe know about, but when I was younger, like maybe in my early 20s, I studied with some different healers, and at that time, my auric vision opened up. I began to see auras. So by the time I got into medical school, I was very interested in disease and auras because I had found that you could actually find illness in the aura before it manifests in the body. And if you could take it out of the aura, you could actually stop disease from coming into process. So I was very interested in that. Did a lot of work around that prior to the incident in the ICU with this lady. But at that time, and over those years, I studied with a lot of different types of healers. I studied with the most profound ones were the Philippine psychic surgeons, where we were working at, they open the body with their hands. They would just run their hands over the body, and the body would open. And then they were going in, and they were, pulling out disease that was in the body. That was very powerful, and that was a very formative time for me, where I realized the power of what we could do with energy and healing. As time went on, I didn't find that they were getting to the source of illness. Like they were, opening the body and taking out the tumors is helpful, yes. But why did the person get sick? Why was the tumor there? And the more I spent time with it, the more I realized that we were still on the surface. We were helping the person heal, but we weren't really healing their spirit, their heart, their soul, the cause of illness. And then that was a problem for me. I didn't like it.
So just before you carry on, just to be clear for our listeners, when you say the Philippine healers, they would go into the body, was that physically sort of going in, or would it be energetically imagining?
No, they were physically going in. Right, they could actually physically go in. But it was powerful to watch. But again, you didn't change a person's consciousness. You didn't change their heart. You didn't change their soul. You didn't bring them closer to God. In some ways, you actually disturbed the whole process. Like by healing it that way, the person didn't have to change. They didn't have to grow. And for me, that was an issue. As time went on, I realized that I wasn't really helping the people spiritually. I was maybe helping them physically. Not that I could not do that. I didn't get to the point where I could open the body, but I was working energetically. Energetically, I could get in. And but I felt like I was doing them a disservice, because these diseases come for a reason. And when you take them away without learning, I believe personally that you're sabotaging the person's spiritual growth. So I chose to stop it. I did study with a very famous etheric surgeon later, a man named Bill Gray, and that was very powerful. That we're working just with energetic usage. We weren't going into the body. We were working with the etheric body. We had a lot of healing of illness with the etheric surgery. But again, I still hit the same problem, which was why we're not changing consciousness. We're not getting to the spiritual teaching of why people get sick. So for me, I eventually realized that, the issue wasn't the aura. The issue wasn't going into the body. The issue wasn't the etheric surgery. The issue wasn't, some of the other methods that we were learning. That the real healing had to be getting to the root of why a person gets sick. Why do they get sick? I'm still fully understanding it. It's a very powerful process. And, for me, there is a moment when you can get instantaneous healing if you understand how to do it. And that's the place, that's my edge. I'm looking at understanding the instantaneous healing. But in any case, the bottom line of it is, when I met Sidi collaborated with what I saw. He said to me, your healing is really good, but if you don't move the heart back to God, to Allah, you're not really healing the person. The real healing is when the heart returns to Allah. And
So,
yes,
sorry, I think that's a massive sort of discussion we want to, inshallah, take our
okay,
time over. So before
okay.
we, uh, before I just ask Samah on her sort of take on her life before Sidi and whether she came in as a healer or a spiritual seeker when she met him, I just want to know about popular healing approaches. I'm sure many of our listeners would be familiar with now. So there's Reiki, which I've done a bit of, acupuncture, and also shamanic healing, where people go on retreats and take ayahuasca and presumably work with the archetypal realms to heal trauma. And have you had any experience with those sort of traditions? And what do you make of those approaches?
Yeah. Are you asking Samar, or are you asking me that question?
Yourself.
Yeah, I've had experience with all of that. And I mean, not necessarily personal experience, but I've worked with shamans, Mexican shamans. I've studied closely with some Reiki people. I have not actually been trained in Reiki. I don't actually agree with Reiki because I have met the Reiki masters on the internet, and I question whether they're really in the light or not. I'm not sure about it. So I think Reiki may be misleading people, and I feel there's some danger with that. As far as ayahuasca, it's very big today, and so many of my students have taken it or used it. One of my students was one of the assistants to the indigenous shamans down in Peru, and spent a lot of time as one of their people. So we've talked a lot. And what she has told me is that even with the ayahuasca, she could not break through what was needed because there was a shell, which we call the tomb. There was a shell that the ayahuasca could not penetrate. She couldn't penetrate it. But in the Sufi work, she's now finally able to penetrate the shell, and she's freeing her spirit. So she's completely put the ayahuasca aside and is only doing the Sufi work now. So I'm not against ayahuasca, but I think there's limitations to it, and some people can be hurt by it.
So what about shamanic approaches that tap into the archetypal world? Like they might resonate with the archetype of a particular animal, say it's an eagle, and use, I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but from the little that I know, they would then tap into the energy of particular animals. Presumably they represent an archetype, or they see things on the archetypal board and start working with their clients on that level. Is that an approach which works, and does it have its limitations?
It's the same thing. Most shamanistic medicine is based on hallucinogenics. They've taken plants and they've opened their vision, and they're working with what they've seen. So you could say it's hallucinogenic plant medicine to start with. Secondly, the animals are qualities. They carry qualities of God. So, for example, eagle, as you said, is one of the highest of the birds. The birds are very high beings. In the animal world, the birds are probably the top of the animal spiritual consciousness, and the eagle is the top of that. So the eagle is a very important bird, carries a very high light, which you can access. The problem with it is that people end up worshiping the birds and they worship the animals, and they don't actually turn to God, because God created the eagle and it's God's light that's in the eagle. So if you start to worship the bird and you turn away from God, that's the mistake. So the right way, in my opinion, is you go to God, you understand that God is the source, God is the ultimate one who decides if you're going to heal or not. So you start with God. Then you pray to God and you receive from God. And then God, if God chooses to send you an eagle, okay, that's fine. You can work with that spirit. But if God doesn't choose to send you an eagle, you probably shouldn't work with it. So the problem is where people idolize the animal spirits, and they don't turn to God itself. That's the problem with shamanistic medicine. And you can see this too. I've in the studies I've done, which are kind of along the Carlos Castaneda group. Many of the shamans were not enlightened, holy people, but they were powerful. They had a lot of power. They, like they could do some really powerful stuff, but it wasn't always of light. You know what I mean? It could easily get corrupted, and that's my only concern with shamanism is just where is God and where is the holiness, and is the shaman practicing that, or is the shaman become corrupted themselves, and then somehow through the power of the energy, they might be making problems for people and people don't realize it.
That's beautiful. Samah, I'm just wondering whether you would like to add to this particular question around your time before Siddhi, what led you to him. We'll obviously discuss your interaction with him later on, but for now, were you sort of spiritually seeking? Was you already a healer? What happened?
Thank you for asking that question, because I love to talk about my time before I met Siddhi. I was a spiritual seeker, very young. I remember at 5 or 6 years old, I was born into a Christian family, and I would close my eyes in church and ask God to show himself to me. And I would open my eyes, and of course I saw the creation, not understanding that the creation is what Allah created and holds all the attributes of Allah. I didn't get disappointed, though. I kept seeking. And I had, as a young child, I always kind of discarded my premonitions I had, but I had very strong premonitions, particularly about things that were going to go bad. And I used to tell my parents, and I'd had very strong dreams and tell my parents things to watch out for. They didn't discard what I'd say, but I discarded it, thinking, oh, this is not important. My seeking continued until I was in my early 20s, and I was living in Europe and was very stressed out. I was in Paris, and it's a very intense city, not unlike London in some ways. And a friend said, why don't you try transcendental meditation? And I immediately signed up because I knew I needed something. And so I became a very ardent follower of transcendental meditation and followed Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. You might remember he was the one that taught meditation to the Beatles. That's one of his fame and how people remember him. But he was a very, in some ways, he had a wonderful practice that he brought to the West that I followed. I even went to his university and served on faculty at his university. So I was very devoted to him. But I always knew in the back of my mind and in my heart something was missing. Until a friend of mine from TM was going to the school. And by the way, in that same time period, I didn't see myself as a healer, but I did learn Reiki. So there was a curiosity about healing.
And so just before you continue, your time with the TM traditional group was how long? How long are we talking?
25 years.
Oh, wow.
25 years, yeah.
Wow.
I met a friend who was at the healing school, and she said, would you like to get a healing from me? And I hadn't seen her for years. So how Allah orchestrates these meetings. And I said, sure, not even knowing what it was. My very first experience with prophetic healing, I could feel something shifting in my heart. And that's what I realized as I worked with her. It only took a few weeks for me to realize, this is what I've been seeking. This is what I want. My heart started feeling more compassion. The world changed for me. How I viewed the world started changing. And I still loved TM. So I was a little torn for a while between doing the remembrance practice, which we can talk about, that is prominent in Sufism, and continuing to do my meditation practice. And I asked my Sufi teachers, what do I do? Because many people in our Tariqa came from the TM tradition. And the answer was always the same: follow your heart. So the end of the story is I followed my heart because my heart was thirsty
Beautiful.
for something deeper than what TM was offering me at that time.
And just on behalf of our listeners who may never have experienced a Sufi healing, what did that look like for you? What was that in it? Was it just a prayer? Was it on the level of consciousness? Was it energetic? What were things recited? Was there physical touch?
My first healings, there was no physical touch. It was energetic. There were prayers that I did not understand because they were in Arabic. And I didn't question them. I was feeling the energy of the prayer. So I could feel something stirring in my spiritual heart, something moving, and I could feel my spiritual heart as I didn't even know it existed before, because TM is basically a meditation of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, being in the West, our minds are the leaders in some respects, not our spiritual heart. So there was something that was moving within me that I had never, ever experienced before. But it was so beautiful and so enticing and so strong that I wanted more of it. My heart was so thirsty for more. I knew there was more. And I just kept asking my friend to continue to give me healings.
Alhamdulillah. That's beautiful. So the next chapter is the meeting with Sidi, and I'll start with Dr. Jaffe. What led you to him? How did you end up meeting him? And what were your initial impressions when you first saw him?
Yeah. Well, at that time I was living in Sedona, Arizona. Sedona is a very famous town for healing, and it's a town of channels. They have people who channel there. We always used to joke. We'd say there's 100 channels and no radio stations, and that was Sedona. So in Sedona, I was doing holistic medicine with the spiritual side of it at that point. And working on it, developing it. And I found that a lot of the sort of the ancient Tibetan teachings, the Alice Bailey and some of the ancient Tibetan teachings really were along the line of what was opening for me. And I assume that's because I had done a medicine Buddha initiation in my early 20s, and it somehow it showed up later in my 30s. But anyways, the bottom line of it was I opened a school. We were having tremendous success with healing. I mean, we were healing thousands of people every month with multiple healers. And then I opened the school to train people, which was called the School of Energy Mastery. And this was back in 1990, 91. And again, we had a lot of people coming, and there was a lot of, we were exploring very deeply the healing, energetic healing. At that time, all of a sudden, I started to get really weak. I was having trouble walking, and I didn't know what was going on. It turned out that my heart wasn't working properly. And what I understood about it was that on the inner, I was absorbing like all the negativity of the diseases from the people and processing them through my heart, but my heart couldn't keep up. It was too many people. And my heart started to fail. I started going into failure of my heart, which is very serious. Okay, heart failure, you die. And at that point, I was in my early 30s. So I thought about it, I prayed about it. And what I heard was kind of what Samah said, that you were healing from your mind and from the energy, but your heart wasn't clearing, wasn't purifying, wasn't healing, and you weren't really dealing with your own heart either. And I realized that I had to learn the heart. I had to understand the heart, because if I didn't, I was going to die. And at that point, they gave me about 6 months to live. So I thought, okay, so I've got 6 months. I'm going to die unless I get this handled. I know I can handle this, but I can't do it because I don't know the heart. So where do you find a heart master? Where do you find somebody who knows heart? So I looked, and So a lot of looking, there was only a couple paths that showed up. And one of them was Sufism. One of them was Christianity, and one of them was Bhakti Yoga. So I looked at Bhakti Yoga, but it still brought me in my mind. So I didn't feel like that was going to heal me. And then I looked at Christianity, which there was a lot of love in Christianity, but I didn't feel the depth. I didn't feel that it was reaching like where I felt the illness inside of me, which was deep in my soul. I didn't feel the Christianity that I was studying reaching into the soul. It was outside more. It didn't hit the deep place. So my last chance was trying to find maybe a Sufi master could reach what I needed to heal. And I prayed very hard. I said, please, Allah, and I didn't call Allah, God, bring me a Sufi master who can heal this, who can heal it at the soul level, who is a true master. I want a true master, because I'm a doctor, we send residents in all the time to heal people. They don't know what they're doing. And sometimes there's mistakes because they don't know and people don't make it. And there's a big difference between a resident and the chief of medicine doing the healing. So I said, please give me a Sufi master who's a chief of medicine, not a Sufi master who's a resident. That's what I was praying for. So, anyways, 2 weeks later, I heard about Siddhi coming to New Mexico. Didn't know anything about him. I didn't really know much about Sufism, to be honest with you. And I went in to see him. I drove up to see him in New Mexico. And I walked into the room. Siddhi was very tiny. He was only maybe 5'3", 5'4", or well, maybe a little bit, but he was short. And I walked in, and at that point I was more kind of Hindu in a way, and I kind of did the salam, namaste. And he said, no, we don't do that. We say salam alaikum, so. And he said, don't bow to me, bow to God. So he made that thing to bow to God. Okay. So that was like really interesting to me that this man didn't even want me, in any way looking to him. And I hope I follow that myself today. And at the same time, he said, he closed his eyes and then he looked at me and he said, you have 6 months to live, which was exactly what I was being told. And I said, my mind was saying, how could he know that? How could he have the knowledge of my life? And I said to him, I said, how did you know that? I mean, this is the second thing we're saying to each other. He said, if you know Allah, you can know everything. If you know Allah, you can know everything. So I said, well, does Allah shows you I have 6 months to live? Does Allah show you I can live? And how can I live? That's why I've come to see you. So he closed his eyes for a very long time, and he was deep in meditation. We came out. He said, I had to travel very, very, very far to get the answers for you, whether you could live or not. And he says, you can live, but the problem is that all your work, your spirituality is coming from the mind. It's coming from meditation. It's coming from that path. He said, you have neglected your heart, and your heart is dying because you've neglected it. And if you're going to live, he said, you're going to have to drop all that stuff. You're going to have to start like a kindergarten again in your heart and walk through your heart. Learn how to do this through your heart. So that was the decision that was made with the whole thing. So I said, all right, let me think about it. It was a big thing because I was, again, 20 years practicing the other way. And I thought about it and I said, okay, initiate me and I will study with you if you promise me that you'll truly can heal me. And I said, if you really can, please don't play games with me because you're playing with my life. If you really feel you can't do it, then I don't want you to do it. Give me some, I'll find somebody else. And he laughed and he said, yes. He said, I can help you with this. And I said, fine. Then took initiation with him, and then I asked him, we got into a discussion about enlightenment. And I said, are you enlightened? And he said, Sufism is different than that, but in your world, yes. And I said, can you guide me to enlightenment? Because that's really what I want. My dream is to reach enlightenment. Can you guide me to enlightenment? And he started laughing. And he said, I can take you far beyond your concepts of enlightenment. He said, what you think enlightenment is just the beginning. There's much, 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 much more. And I can show you that. I can show you the depth of what's possible. And I said, and that was when I heard that, and he could heal me, that's when I chose to really embrace the Sufi path at that point.
That's beautiful. And just for my listeners, just for clarity, the school you had opened up, the holistic healing with an element on spiritual focus, was that rooted in any particular tradition? Was that Buddhist healing? I think you said something earlier about that, or was it just generic holistic healing?
Well, like I said, I think when in my 20s, I did the medicine Buddha initiation, which I think put me in the Tibetan lineage. So what started happening when I was around 27 was that I would start to have dreams of masters coming to me. They would actually start to come to me. And as they came to me, they would start to teach me. They would show me things like this light, how you move it, how you look into something, how you open something, where diseases were in the body, how to work with it. So all the teaching for me was all done directly with connection to these inner teachers. Later, I found that somebody gave me one of the Alice Bailey books on esoteric healing. And actually, I found that almost everything I was learning was right there. So I realized that in a way, whatever she was channeling, whatever I had been given, were the same. They're very similar. So I realized that was esoteric healing. But esoteric healing is you're working with chakras, you're working with energy centers, you're working with the soul, you're working with, rays. But what you're not doing is you're not working with the heart, you're not working with God, and you're not working with divine names.
And you've touched on something really important here, the concept of initiation, and which is rooted in tradition and a lineage. And it sounds like this goes beyond a formal sort of agreement, but something which aligns you on the inner sort of levels. And then you took a hand with Siddhi, who initiated you. So what does initiation mean in the Sufi context, or in a wider context, if you like? And what role, how important is that for a seeker of truth?
I think initiation is very important because, first of all, it's very easy to go astray. It's very easy when you're on your own to follow what you think is right, and what you think is right is not right, and then you go astray, and then you hurt people. For example, we saw that with John of God a little bit recently with what happened over there. There was no, quote, supervision. Who was supervising him? So that he, like in a normal lineage, the higher lineage holders who have been certified supervise lower ones, so that if you start going astray, you stop it and you purify it, so you don't go down that road. That was missing. So lineage, first of all, having a lineage is important on the outer, but on the inner, many of the spirits, like when people reach the enlightenment or they reach the unity, the spirits are very conscious when they die, and they're present. So you have a lineage of essentially enlightened or unity teachers who are there, who will help guide you and hold you and correct you and help you if you're conscious of them. And even when you're not conscious of them, they still help you because you feel them. They feel like if you do something wrong, you'll feel sick inside. You'll feel something not right. They're sending to you, hey, you're making a mistake. You got to stop this. It's not right what you're doing. So you have protection. There's protection from the lineage on the inner. And on the outer, there's also, when you have people who have ijaza, who have permission, there's protection because they have been deeply, deeply tested to make sure that they don't go astray. And so You don't get to be one of these higher teachers without very serious testing. So that's the beauty of the lineage.
That's wonderful. And so, Samah, would you want to add to your first encounter with Siddhi and what that was like?
Yes, there were many people in my area, again, most of them from the TM community, who were interested in Siddhi. But I was very devoted to Maharishi, and I just came to hear about Siddhi out of curiosity more than anything, and also because I had been getting these Sufi healings, and they were really helping me. So the very first time that some of the people, my friends, took hand with Siddhi, I was the stubborn one. They were on the telephone. He was in Jerusalem. We were here in Maryland. And there were maybe 10 of us. And most people were going ahead on the telephone, taking hand with him over the phone. And I was the last holdout. And I said, I'm not doing this. This is, Maharishi is my guru. He's my guide. And Siddhi might be an interesting person. I don't know him, but I'm not going to do this. And within about a minute of saying that, I found myself on the telephone taking hand with Siddhi. And I could not explain it. And there was no mental logic to it. There was no... I'd been digging in my heels, and suddenly I'm on the telephone, and it felt like this light came over me that was palpable. I was laughing, I was giggling, and I was so happy. So that was my first encounter, and I took hand right away. And then a few weeks later, the same group of people, we came together at the home of Salima Edelstein, who's she's the co-president of the University of the Healing School, and a very prominent teacher. She was my teacher. And we were having lunch at her house, and we were talking about the Sufi path and healing, etc. And several people at the lunch table said that they were planning on going to the healing school. Salima turned to me and she said, "Samah, are you going to the healing school?" And I said, no. I'm at this point, I was a hardcore cultural consultant in the corporate world. And I was working with very high-level leaders and felt great importance from that. There was a lot of arrogance that I carried because I was working in a world with big egos. And so my ego had to match theirs. And I felt going to a healing school, it didn't fit the profile I had of myself. I took a bite of my sandwich and I literally choked when I said, no, I'm not going to the healing school. It grabbed my throat. Not choking in the sense I thought I was going to die, but clearly something was blocked here. And so my beautiful friends sitting around the table and my wonderful teacher, Salima, she just took my hand and she said, so let's revisit that question about you going to the healing school. And again, without my mind getting too engaged, I found myself on an airplane going for the next session of the healing school. I still hadn't really in my heart, though, fully accepted Siddhi. I'd taken hand with him, but I still wasn't sure about this man because he comes across, when you first met him, he could be gruff. And he spoke with a very thick accent. And he was so different from Maharishi. And so I was still a little hesitant and shy around him and wasn't sure really, even if I wanted to get close to him, I wasn't drawn to him. I was drawn to his teachings, but not to the man. And so at the healing school, my very first session, he was there and he was teaching. And he showed up every time for every meeting. He would always be on time, which defied my own stereotype as an interculturalist of people from the Middle East, because the people I had worked with in the Middle East were not on Western time. And so that was my first, this is very interesting, this man. I arrived 5 minutes early to the class, and there were maybe I don't know, 8 or 10 of us sitting in the room, and CD arrived 5 minutes early also. And he was up on a platform and he looked out among us and he said, with tears in his eyes, "I will miss you. You are all my beloveds, and I have to leave today." And I saw a tear coming down his cheek. And I said, "This man is real. He is my guide. He is my father." And I fell in love with him at that moment, because there was this real sentiment of how much he cared for me. The rest is history. I mean, the other huge gift CD gave me, in addition to many others, is that he married my beloved and I, who had been dating for 3.5 years. My beloved did not want to discuss marriage. He was very much afraid of it. He was committed to me, but not yet to the point of marriage. And so he lost a bet with me, which is another story. And he came to see CD. First time he'd ever met him. But he was also very devoted to Maharishi still. And we went up to ask CD if he could bless a company that we had just formed. And we had no clients. We were both successful consultants in our own fields, but we wanted to work together. And when we asked CD that question, he said, "Give me your hands." And he married us. This was something that I had wanted for 3 years. I remember that day very clearly. Ibrahim walked up to my beloved, who he didn't know, hadn't met officially, put his arm around him, looked him right in the eye and said, "You do know that you are really married now," just in case there was any doubt. So time and time again, my beloved and I have thanked CD we used to thank CD every time we saw him for marrying us. And his answer was always the same: "Thank Allah." He's a very modest man, very humble.
Beautiful. So let's take a bit of a deep dive now into CD. And he, as far as I know, was the judge's judge in Palestine. He was the chief judge. So he was trained in the Islamic sciences. He was a custodian of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. I mean, that's a pretty high position to have in the first place. And then on top of that, he was a Chandali Sheikh. So, Dr. Jaffe, could you just tell us, before we look at your interaction with him and how he put you through training and trials and taught you the tradition, let's just look at Sidi himself and how he received his teachings. I read somewhere, I think it's in your book, he seemed to have this connection with Ibn Arabi and Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani, two prominent Sufi figures, and possibly, I think, Rabi al-Adawiya. Tell us a bit more about Sidi, his sort of background, how he was taught Sufism and what sort of connections he had.
Yeah, I mean, Sidi came from a Sufi family in Jerusalem, and his grandfather was a Rafai Sheikh. Rafai is a Tarika branch of Sufism, and his mother, if I understand, also was very holy as well, and also I think Sufi. So he came down this lineage, and he was recognized very early, even like 5 years old, that there was something very special about him. And so they kind of put him into an accelerated teaching to, prepare him for his future. They recognized that he would be a great sheikh and that he would need that. So he was taught Quran and memorized at a very early age. He was put into all the Islamic sciences early on. Extremely bright, extremely, we've never talked about IQs, but I'm sure his IQ is very high. I think as time went on, he felt there were limitations within the Sufi teachings that he was receiving. And at that point, he began to seek something deeper, and he was given to the Shadaliya Tarika. There was a Shadaliya Tarika, and the head of the Shadaliya Tarika was believed to be the Qutb. The Qutb is like what's called the pole, the central pole. And there's every Tarika has a Qutb, but then the world has a Qutb, which is like the spiritual head of the world, you could say. And it was believed that this man was the Qutb of the world. That was what the story was. So he was placed with him.
So what's his name? What was the sheikh's name?
It was Sheikh Tilmasani. Was I believe his name, and there was another. He was actually bringing together two lines, and I can't remember. I think it was Sheikh Tilmasani who was the Qutb, but there was another one as well. So, and I may have that wrong. If I do, I apologize. But the two lines, the two Shadaliya lines came together. So he studied with both sheikhs. One of them was Qutb, and they then transferred that to him. He became the inheritor after that Qutb died. And so Sidi at that point was, I don't have any idea what his age was, but he was younger, maybe 30s or 40s at that point. And he was then very quickly elevated into a very high spiritual rank, where he pretty much became the one who studied everything, so he was, in other words, he was the one that was kind of leading the people at that time. From that point forward, he found, my understanding was that he wasn't finding the teachers to train him that he needed because of his own rank. So what he ended up doing is he began to be able to contact the spirits of Abdul Qadir Jilani and Ibn Arabi. And he actually went and he spent time studying with them. He actually spent time with, at their tombs, communicating with their spirits. He had all their textbooks. He would study their textbooks, and the spirits would then help him to understand what it was that they were teaching. So he spent a number of years drinking from Ibn Arabi, Abdul Qadir Jilani, Hassan al-Shadili. He knew Rafai, and he brought all that together, and he brought that into his teaching, which became his own sort of. He clearly said it was Shadili, but it was Shadili that had opened to some of the deeper teachings of Jilani and Ibn Arabi. So it became a very, very high teaching, and that's what he brought in at that time. What he told me was that he believed that the Shadaliya line had the fastest way to God. He felt that it was the most complete, it was the fastest, and therefore he put aside all the others to really hold the Shadaliya line. However, he also felt that that the influence of Ibn Arabi and Jilani was very important for the Gnostic levels.
That's beautiful. And what about the Sufi healing that he taught? Was that part of the Shadili lineage, or did he learn it from his grandfather, or is that part of the Sufi path, or was that distinct?
Well, I think that the Tib part, which is the herbal part, he learned from his grandfather. And he's a very good herbalist. He actually had to spend a lot of time learning the Tib. The spiritual side of it, actually, I don't know if he took that directly from anybody or he developed that himself. I'm not actually sure the source of that, to be honest with you.
Beautiful. And could you tell us, given he was a prominent scholar and gave sermons in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, what was his approach? How did he view Islamic law? And often there's a tight balance between the inner and the outer, and some traditions or some schools in the West are now advocating a non-Islamic Sufism, so it's not using the framework and just doing the inner sort of work.
Oh, I mean, first of all, he was trained in the Hanbali school of fiqh. And Hanbali is probably the strictest school. And he had a very strict education in it. And I think that affected his own way of looking at fiqh. I think he carried a fairly I don't want to say strict, but he carried that deep Hanbali understanding within him. At the same time, he had learned from Junaid, who's one of the great Sufi masters, that hakika, meaning enlightenment, unity, without Sharia, which is the outer law, was not accurate. And there were a lot of statements in this. He would say, if you if you study hakika and you're not balanced by Sharia, that your hakika would go astray. And at the same time, if you had Sharia but you didn't have hakika, that you would end up oppressing people through the Sharia. So he was very clear that you needed the combination of both to really fully have a complete understanding of how to really guide people. So I think with that, he ended up becoming a judge in Palestine and Jordan, and then became the head judge, and then became the judge of judges. When the judge of judges is the one who goes around and has to look at, follow, make sure, check all the other judges are operating in the accurate way. So that was his role. On the outer role, he was the Qadi al-Qadi, he was the judge of judges for all Palestine and Jordan. On the inner, he, as you said, was the Shadali Sheikh, who had inherited, I believe, the role of Qutb from his master. And then he was brought into the position of the head imam of Al-Aqsa. And so Al-Aqsa, for people who don't know, there's three holy sites in Islam: Mecca and Medina and Al-Aqsa. And he was the head sheikh of Al-Aqsa for probably 40 years plus. And during that time, he was guiding the Palestinians through the Israeli occupation, the multiple wars that occurred between the Arabs and the Jews. He became very close with Menachem Begin, and in fact, he told me that much of what happened in the 6-Day War, which ended, and there was very little bloodshed, or not what it could have been, was due to the relationship between him and Menachem Begin, and that he told me a story that Anwar Sadat and Menachem had come to a conclusion, and they signed a treaty, or it was a verbal treaty. In Arab world, that's a big deal. Like when you give a word, if you say this is what I do, you better do it, because your word is more important than what you write on a paper. Well, apparently what happened was, after they signed it, Menachem Begin reneged on it, and he went back and he said, I'm not going to do it, which, again, in the Arab world is like the greatest insult you can give. It was a tremendous insult. And Anwar Sadat was infuriated. Apparently it was going to attack full on in Israel because of what happened. And because Sidi actually stepped in, and he explained, he brought the mercy into Menachem Begin to apologize. You apologize to Anwar Sadat, and Anwar Sadat, you need to be the mercy. You need to receive this, because this is for all the people. It's not just for the two of you. It's for everybody. So he made the two of them sit down together. Apparently Menachem Begin apologized, Anwar Sadat accepted it, and they signed the 6-Day War when the war ended. So he had a very prominent political role in that way. He had the role of being imam of the mosque and guiding the Palestinian Jordanian people. He had very frequently more than 1 to 5 million people that would come. He told me, I just spoke today, yes, on Friday Juma to 3.5 million people today. We had a good talk. He was teaching large groups of people. And he was in a war zone. He was dealing, it was a continual, the 20, 30 years 40 years he was in there were continual battles going on between the Jewish people and the Arabs. There were multiple wars, a lot of people dying. And I think that gruff skin that Samah talked about was from having to deal with that level of violence and animosity for 40 years straight. You had to be very strong to be able to hold, multiple attackers like that. And he told me one story, again, maybe I'm going on, you can cut this out if you want, but
please do.
He told me a great story where at one point, the Jewish people wanted to, regain the Temple Mount because, the story was that they could build the temple, that would be the rise of Judaism as a world power, as the leaders of the world. So it's very important in Judaism to be able to, the Messiah would return when the third temple was built, and the Jewish people would be brought into a prominent position worldwide. So this has been going on for many years now, from my understanding. So there was a lot of desire to regain that area and to get rid of Al-Aqsa and the golden, the dome of the rock, and to rebuild the Jewish temple there. So at one point, the story was that the military surrounded Al-Aqsa, and they were going to run tanks over it. They were going to bring tanks, and they were going to bring all the buildings down. And City grabbed all of the people who were on the mount, and they formed a large circle around all the buildings so that they would have to run over the people to get to the buildings. So the story is that the Israeli government brought in the sharpshooters. I guess it was the Mossad. I don't know, but they brought them in to shoot these people. I don't know if they were using rubber bullets or what they were using.
Oh, I think Jaffe's just frozen there. So I'll be back. Yeah. You said something about rubber bullets.
Okay. I don't know if they're getting a lot of unstable connection here, but bottom line, the Jewish sharpshooters were brought in and to bring the Muslims down so that they could raise the buildings and bring the tanks onto get rid of all the buildings. So apparently later, City, the next day they stopped it. They did stop it. Didn't happen. The next day, City went to a cafe, and the head of sharpshooter, the head of the main one, walked into the cafe and introduced himself. He said, "Are you, Sheikh Mohammed?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "I just want to come and meet you." He said, "Because I am the top sharpshooter. No one's better than me." And he said, "I shot at you many, many times, and the bullets would not hit you. The bullets kept being turned aside and would go off in other directions, but they would not hit you. And I realized that you truly were a holy person, that God would give you that kind of protection. So I've come here to say hello and meet you and say my salams, my blessings to you." So it was, this is kind of many, many stories like this, but that was one of my favorite ones that happened with City.
And so, Dr. Jaffe, could you, for our listeners, especially those from Muslim backgrounds who've often experienced Islam from a legal perspective, and I'm thinking of Ibn Arabi's school of law here, where it's just filled with compassion and mercy, and he accepts all the positions essentially as valid, and then has his own take often, which allows for the opening, for something to come through, and he allows for compassion and mercy. So did the Hakika Sidi embody inform the way he practiced the outer Sharia. So, on the one hand, somebody can be quite strict, but on the other hand, there's a certain beauty in the form that they adhere to. It's a manifestation, it's a zahir. It's not just being strict in external form, but it's informed by a sense of beauty and love of, say, the sunnah. It's not just a legal prescription or a commandment. It's informed by the heart. What I'm really trying to ask is the relationship between the Hakika and the Sharia. Did it inform the way he understood and practiced it?
I mean, these are really broad questions you're asking. I think that the question is, what is the relationship between Hakika and Sharia? How does that come together? I think that's really the deep question. I think the answer is, first, your studies of Islamic law need to be very sound. Like, you need to really have a sound understanding of what you're studying. And when I say sound, I would say also balanced. Like a lot of times, sometimes people learn Islamic law, there's a lot of fanaticism in the learning. And I think that leads to a very strict, somewhat aggressive form of Islam, and which I don't personally like, because I think it takes the rights of people away, and I don't really believe that's how Prophet Muhammad practiced it. I don't believe he practiced it. I think he practiced the law with mercy, and not only with mercy, but with Gnostic realization. And you've heard me tell the story, and I'll tell it again for your listeners, about the two men that came to Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, and one of the men said, Prophet, what is the fiqh on killing somebody? And the Prophet looked at him and said, if you kill somebody, you'll go to the deepest hell, and you'll never come out, and it's the worst thing you can do, and never do it. And I don't know all the words, but basically contradicted it very, very strongly. And it was very unusual, because the companions knew him as very merciful, so they never heard him come down with a dictum with that much harshness. And they contemplated it. And then a while later, another man came and said, Prophet Muhammad, what is the fiqh on killing somebody? And he said, he looked at the man for a while, and he said, well, Allah is the most merciful of the mercy. And if you truly make tawbah, you make repentance, Allah will forgive you, for what you did. And then, the companions, Umar, Abu Bakr, and whoever else was there, they were like shocked at the radical dichotomy of what he said to the two people. But you see, for me, this captures the real understanding of Hakika and fiqh and Sharia. When he looked with Hakika, Marifa, into the first man, he saw something. With Allah's guidance, he saw that the man was going to kill somebody. And this is on the inner. So he saw the bottom. He saw something on the inner. He saw the man was going to kill somebody. He saw the future. The man wanted to kill somebody. Now, once he saw that, he understood that he needed to protect this man's soul. So the man didn't kill somebody, and then would deal with whatever the outcomes of that would be, which is major sin. So he gave a very strong statement to him: you're going to go to the deepest hell if you do this, because he stopped. He put in what was needed to stop the violation of divine law, and it worked. The man didn't kill anybody, in my understanding. Second man, when he came, the same thing happened, using Hakika, using Marifa, using divine knowledge, divine insight. He looked in and he saw that the man had killed somebody and was deeply repentant about what had happened. the man was losing hope because he didn't want to kill somebody. Whatever happened. And he felt incredible mercy and compassion for this man. This man needed hope. He needed to know that there was possibility that he wasn't going to be thrown into the deepest hell. So he gave the man the medicine so his spirit could make true tawbah and would have the greatest chance of receiving Allah's forgiveness in the afterlife. And this is the interplay between Hakika and Sharia. If you don't have this, then you have to rule your legal rulings through your Sharia. But the problem is, we've seen this in many countries. They're ruling in a way that is not good. It's going extreme. It's going into extremism. The mercy is gone. The compassion is gone. It becomes a very what's the word? Radical form of Islam. And I think that this is what we have to be careful about today. Is Islam is, the Prophet was the mercy. He said, I came as a mercy to the people. He had marifa. He had deep understandings, which a person of hakika has something like that. Maybe never to the level that a prophet would have, but they have insight. They have very deep insight. That insight can help with the ruling. So it's not just so harsh and cold, but there's mercy and there's compassion and there's like an understanding. Okay, well, maybe this person really has made tawbah and they've understood it. So maybe we don't have to be so strict with them because they're not going to return to it. Or somebody else might be saying, oh yeah, I've got it. And yet when you look deep, you know they're lying. They haven't changed anything. They're going to do it again. A person of hakika would probably know that. And would be able to give the medicine. Okay, this person really hasn't changed. Maybe they need to go to prison, or maybe something needs to happen. This person did the same thing, but you know what? They really understood their mistake. They really made a difference. I give mercy to this person. So for me, personally, I am very much in the Ibn Arabi school. I very much believe that the highest form of fiqh comes from mercy and forgiveness when it's appropriate. In other words, you don't take a serial killer and turn him back out on the street again out of mercy because he's just going to go kill somebody. You have to know that he's changed, or you don't. You're going to keep people safe. But at the same time, if there is a shred of goodness and light, and you can develop that in the person, then having the mercy to help them is actually the higher way of being. And so I very much follow that school.
So now coming on to some more esoteric aspects of Siddhi's teachings. In one, we mentioned lineage earlier on, and obviously you have a beautiful lineage going back to Ibn Mashish through Sheikh Abu Hassan al-Shadili and Abu Madian, who Ibn Arabi was very close to or regarded as his teacher, and then all the way back to the Prophet, peace be upon him. So and again, I'm thinking of my listeners here, in terms of understanding the role of the Prophet in Islam and particularly in the Sufi path. I know Ibn Mashish in his wazifa, it's all around the prophetic substance, the Prophet, peace be upon him. What, in your understanding, is the Haqiqa Muhammadiyah, or the Muhammadan substance, and what role does it have in a seeker who's approaching the truth or journeying towards God?
Sufism is based on the inner reality of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. It's based on the inner reality, and the story where I think it was Umar came to the Prophet, and he said to him, there's a man out in one of the villages. He has a bird on his back, what do you call it? Not a tattoo, but a birthmark. Looks like a bird. And you find him, and he knows me truly, and you need to go talk to him because you don't know me. And these are his companions. And they went to find him and found the man. It was a sheep herder. and said, you should go say your salams to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. And the man said, no, I can't do that. I'm too shy. I could never be in that great of a presence. And I'm just happy to be, here, that he's alive, but I could not go see him. And out of their discussion, this man said to Umar, you know his presence, but you do not know his inner reality. He said, I know his inner reality, and you don't know that. And I'm too shy to go to him because of the greatness of his inner reality. Sufism is based on understanding the inner reality, but modified, real Sufism, modified by the divine law. In other words, you're not leaving the divine law. The divine law is there. You're practicing it with mercy, with love, but you know it. You don't cross it. You're not going to do adultery. You're not going to slander people. You're not going to, cheat people as in merchants. You're not going to, do anything like that. You're going to marry in the right way. You're going to divorce in the right way. It's all based on the basic fiqh, but it's within that you're learning the reality of the Prophet, what is really going on inside of him, which is not just the outer law. People, you think that the outer law is everything. The outer law is a shell that contains the spirit of the Prophet. The spirit is the Haqiqah al-Muhammadiyah. It's the reality, the inner reality of the Prophet, which is the mercy, which defines the outer and holds the outer. If you have a tree and you cut off its spirit, even if you have a strong outer shell, the tree is going to die. You have to have the life of the tree as the spirit. The life of the tree of Islam is Prophet Muhammad. The reality of that tree comes from Allah through his reality into the religion. So Sufism is not about dropping the outer. People misunderstand that. It's not about that. And those that are doing it have lost something. They've lost a very important part of it. The outer is just a reflection of the inner. The outer is Allah's words on the Mulk, and the inner is Allah's words in the Lahut and the Jabarut and the Malakut. And these come together. They're not separate. You can't just have Allah's words on the inner and not on the outer. Allah's words are both. So you have to honor the outer, the divine law, the fiqh, the sharia. You honor it, you respect it, you learn it, you practice it with nobility. But then on the inner, you temper it with mercy and compassion and insight and understanding and gnosis and tajalli from Allah and insight that helps you to understand how to apply the outer in a gentle and kind and loving, profoundly noble way. And that's the value of the inner teaching. So for me, as I said before, if you have somebody of Hakika and they throw away Sharia, then nothing will restrain their Hakika. They can do what they want and they get in trouble. We've seen that over and over again in the last 100 years of people reaching enlightenment and then getting in trouble because they're not restricting it with Sharia. But the other side of it, we see people with Sharia who, are killing their own children because of something happens that they don't like. And there's all sorts of practices that are going on throughout the world, which are extremely without the mercy of Islam, the mercy of the Prophet within it. That is also a problem. So there's extremes on both sides. The center path is in my opinion the right way. We need to know the outer, we need to know the inner, we need to bring them together, and needs to be practiced with love and mercy and kindness and clarity and law together. That is the correct way to practice it. And I believe that's Tasiri practice. I believe that was what he brought into.
Mm-hmm. So Dr. Jaffe, some questions around terms and definitions, and I'll let you decide whether you want to give a metaphysical bent on this or take Siddhi's teachings or your own kash for your own understanding. And so these are quite broad, but they, I think, are pertinent, important questions for listeners. One is the word God means many things to different people. And so when you use God or Allah, Is it another archetype? Is it a concept? What do we mean by this term God?
I mean, for me, God and Allah are the same. I don't see any difference between Allah and God. The real God, la ilaha illallah, the real God is Allah. It's the same. There's no difference. I think many people, have in the West, anyways, we have many different gods. Some people make the eagle a god. Some people make a kachina, Hopi kachina a god. Some people make attributes of God, are as God. So I think that God is God, and God has attributes, and attributes are worshipped by people, and not God itself. And that's the main issue. So when I say God, I say Allah, the God, the one who has the essential reality, has attribute, and those attributes can play out as an eagle, or can play out as an angel, or it can play out in different ways. It can be carried by, angels are carrying the light of, let's say, Al-Rahman Ar-Rahim, or something like that, or Al-Bari or Musawir. But we shouldn't be worshiping them. We should be worshiping God and really appreciating and valuing the attributes and how they manifest themselves.
So from a Gnostic's point of view, when they use this term God, as opposed to, say, somebody who is only religiously conditioned, who also uses that term and says, I worship God, but they haven't tasted or haven't the awareness of the greater reality for somebody who's just simply religiously conditioned. From the Gnostic's point of view, when they are turning to the absolute reality, the truth, and presumably the source, that's what they refer to as God. Is that right? Is that how you would?
Yeah. The God is, we say there's 7 heavens, right? And we say that there's a throne in the 7th heaven, and that God sits on that throne. But I think that's a very humanized understanding of it. I think that God's reality surrounds the entire creation and interpenetrates it. Sitting on the throne is not just a man sitting on a seat. It's a light that interpenetrates down the entire existence, galaxies and atoms and human beings and things we don't even know about, other dimensions. Who knows? God's reality interpenetrates all of it and is the ultimate authority over all of it. And he's ultimate goodness. So for me, when we say God, we're talking about that beyond conscious being who is the king, the Malik of all of it, who has ultimate control of all of it, ultimate authority out of all of it, and yet chooses to define himself with compassion and mercy. And that, for me, is what we're worshiping. We're worshiping the one who is ultimately beyond everything, has power over everything, is ultimately good, and at the end of the day, loves us and cares for us and is kind to us and supports us. And that, for me, is a being worthy of worship. And that's what we worship.
Super. And then what does it mean to be a Sufi? Who is a Sufi? And I'll just add a little context. There's a saying that the person who claims to be a Sufi is not a Sufi, or the first sign of, somebody who's a Sufi is they never claim to. So what is, and I guess for my listeners, maybe within context of the modern archetypes, like the yogi, the monk, these mainstream sort of ideas that they're more familiar with. And often when they hear Sufism, they think of whirling dervishes, who are obviously one manifestation of Sufis. But what does it mean to be a Sufi?
Well, again, when Allah created existence, it says he created existence so that we would know him. And that's like the core of creation, that existence was created so God could be known. How do we know God? Well, a lot of people think the way you know God is through doing right actions that God is pleased with. But that's like a kindergarten understanding of it. That's necessary to do it, but that's not knowing God. That's knowing his actions. It's knowing how he ordains his actions. But knowing God is something much more profound. God has to be found, and you will not find God until you purify your heart so that you can find God in your heart. God, he says, only my faithful believer carries me. It's in the heart that God reveals itself. And if your heart is full of anger and hatred and fear and judgment, and you think you're better and you're arrogant and you think you know more, how will you ever find the reality that could express itself within inside of you? You have to take responsibility for your own heart, and your heart should be a heart full of love. It should be a heart full of kindness. It should be a heart full of mercy. For me, if I don't see love and mercy in a heart, I feel it. If I don't feel the mercy and the love in somebody's heart, whatever they're teaching, I'm not sure I trust it, because I just don't feel it. Then I know that it's going to come from hidden anger, hidden rage, hidden jealousy, hidden, something. Sure, maybe I don't trust it. But when I feel the real love and mercy in a person's heart, I know they've done their work. And so whatever they say, it's, even if it's maybe not classically understood, it's coming from the right place. And I trust that more.
That's beautiful. And so we define Mohammedan substance, God, Sufi, something we've spoken about before, but I just want to have it on record for our listeners, because I think it's such an important teaching. Is often, or in some cases, some Sufi paths can focus on the zikr, which one can argue is a good action, but also has an impact on the heart. However, some Sufi traditions and orders have a foundational inner work, if you like, in which it's not just the transformation of the heart, but it's also clearing those vices, actively seeking and clearing, not just relying on the sort of, the dhikr to do that, have that impact, but to turn within and to acknowledge and face those vices, and then various approaches, divine attributes, etc. And often it's the sheikh who would come in a community and do this inner work, in some traditions anyway. And then we have the working on those vices, decorating the soul or the heart with beautiful qualities, and then the spiritual experiences which can transform faith, which can strengthen you on the mystical path. So this brings us up to the question around spiritual healing and spiritual walking. What's the relationship between the two? Because often they're seen as separate, but you've always said they're not separate. They're one and the same thing.
Well, again, we have to go back to the creation story. Allah created us to know him. And then he says, I was a hidden treasure longing to be known, and I buried myself in the heart of the faithful believer. This is the whole story. If I'm a hidden treasure and I'm buried in the heart of the faithful believer, where am I? Why can't you find me? Okay, well, the reason you can't find me is because your heart is veiled. And what are veils? Veils are negative emotions. Veils are negative experiences. Veils are illusionary understandings. And there are veils of light, which are the attributes and how the attributes veil the reality itself. So there's veils of darkness and veils of light. The Sufi, at the end of the day, has to go through the veils of light, meaning that you have to learn compassion, and then you have to return your compassion to become like God's compassion. And when your compassion completes and perfects itself, you've come closer to God. You've taken on the attribute of compassion. You're carrying it. Okay. If your compassion is full of hatred, what happened to it? In other words, your compassion has been corrupted, or you could say veiled or constricted. You have to purify that. There has to be a purification of. Let's say that as a child, you needed your mom's or your dad's compassion. You fell down, you hurt yourself, you wanted your dad to be nice to you and say, "Oh, you really hurt yourself. I love you. I'm here for you." And instead, your dad beat you up. How dare you do that? I don't like that. I don't want you crying. You be strong and don't ever say a word. And what do you learn? You learn there is no compassion. Compassion becomes veiled. You don't have it. So to find the hidden treasure, you have to unveil the compassion. You have to find compassion, or you will not find the hidden treasure. But you see, the thing is, if you hold the image of your father not giving you the compassion, and he really hurt you, and you felt like you were punched in the stomach when he did that, the image of your father will interlay in your body, in your stomach, and it will go into your unconscious, and it will hang out in there for the rest of your life until you purify it. If it is strong enough, like you felt like you were punched in the stomach, it will sit in your stomach and it will begin to eat away at your stomach. And over a period of 10 or 15, 20 years, you will end up with disease in your stomach of some type. Okay, if you're going to heal that disease, it's the same thing. You've got to go in and find out that experience of being punched in the stomach by your father without the compassion is inside of you. You have to release it. When you release it, the stomach frequently heals. But when you release it, you're also learning to be compassionate, and you're coming closer to God's compassion. So pure spiritual purification, spiritual healing is nothing more than an outer manifestation of what's purified in Sufism. In other words, the stomach gets sick because you've not taken care of it for 20 years. That's my experience. If you go in and take care of it immediately, or even later, as long as the body hasn't passed the point of no return, the body usually can heal. In other words, if you scarred up your stomach because of that memory, and now you have scar tissue all over your stomach, you may not be able to get your stomach functioning back. Okay, but if the body is still possible to repair itself, the body will repair itself once you release the splinter of that experience. So really, it depends on the state of the body, the state of the immune system, if it can repair itself. But at the end of the day, spiritual purification and spiritual healing are exactly the same thing. There's no difference. Spiritual healing is when the image of that experience, the memory, has gone in the body and now is being manifested as an illness by Allah's will. Allah says, I want you to understand that you cannot function this way any longer because this experience is destroying you. You're not taking care of it. So now I'm going to show it to you as illness. So you have to face it. So you have to clean it. So you have to come closer to me. I'm going to make you do this. It's done from mercy. People don't like it because they get sick. It hurts. And I get that. Nobody wants it. But at the same time, Allah is trying to show you something very, very important. And you have to see it. If you don't, then you miss it. And that's why I say, like when I was doing the Philippine psychic healing or surgery or whatever, pulling out a disease, and we haven't looked at why the person's sick. I haven't helped them discover the hidden treasure. All I've done is taken the disease away, and they're never going to discover it. And that's my issue with those things, is that sometimes you need some help. You really do need it. But if you don't take the time to take care of what Allah is asking you to take care of, you've really shot yourself in the foot. You've really not helped yourself. You've actually broken what Allah has given you.
Beautiful. So just on this theme on Allah showing you things, reminds me of the Quranic verse, we shall show them our signs in the horizons and within themselves. And there's this idea of mirroring, which I know Maulana Rumi just got to take one example of a classical source. It's not necessarily a modern idea, but Rumi talks about the Chinese artists and the Greek artists and how the Greek creates something really elaborate when they paint this room, but the Chinese, I might have got them mixed up, so apologies for that, but I think the Chinese basically polish the wall until it's basically a complete mirror. And when the sun comes in and the curtains are drawn, the Greeks marvel at the beautiful paintings they've drawn, but the Chinese basically reflects all of that majestic beauty from the heavens back. And, you know, I think that's a really nice metaphor. So I'm just going to read two quotes to you. And this again is looking at Sufism and Islam outside conditional understandings, but to see them in a universal perspective. Because I think, from my understanding, Sidi did touch on these themes in his books and in his teachings, but I'd like to hear it from you. So the first one is by Carl Jung. And the quote is, "Unless you learn to face your own shadows, you will continue to see them in others." So see them in others. Projection. Because the world outside is only a reflection of the world inside you. End quote. Could you comment on that?
Oh, I love that. I absolutely love that. And I agree with that 100%. And I think that's actually one of the issues with Sufism, honestly, is that some people, they don't want to look at the shadows. They're looking only to Allah, which is really right. But if you don't take the time to look to Allah, but also tether your camel and look at what's going on inside of you, your shadows will play out hiddenly inside of it. You have to look at it with Allah's light. So the answer is you go to Allah first. You learn to illuminate your reality with Allah's light. But then when Allah shows you something like a trial, something happens in your life that's difficult, you have problems, you ask Allah then to illuminate what is in my ego, what's in my shadow, what's in myself that is not right. Allah will reveal it to you. You'll see it. Oh, there's my arrogance. There's my jealousy. There's my ego. You see it. Once you see it, you don't just flitter it away. It's not important. You clean it. You take care of it. You wash it. You clean it. You make it impeccable. I watched Sidi do that over and over and over again with people that came to him. I even saw him do it at times with himself over the years. And I certainly myself do it all the time. We are looking at our own. We have to look at those tarnished places inside of ourselves and clean them with the light of Allah. That is what will make us complete people. It is what Jung is speaking about, and truly, it really is the Sufi way. And if you're not doing that, you miss something. You forgot something. You missed something.
So if he was face to face with Jung, I think his approach is to bring consciousness to the manifestation of the darkness or the shadow. But in the Sufi way, I believe it's the use of divine names. Could you say a bit something about that approach, or what Sidi?
Awareness of the shadow, falls probably under the quality al-khabir. It's using a quality to reveal something. But in Sufism, we don't want to only use a quality. We want to use the reality. We want to access the reality, which is we call Allah or Hakika or these states. So in Sufism, you want to be aware of the shadow, but then you want to bring the illumination of the reality into the shadow so that the shadow can be understood through Allah's wisdom. And it totally changes what happens with the shadow when you do that.
I love that, because for me, it's saying when you reach that point where you see your shadow, your nafs play out, you're taking ownership to say, oh Allah, this is my responsibility. But you're not saying I can change it. You're saying, Allah, it's your light that can change it. It's your power. I'm almost helpless here. I'm turning to you in this need, and that's so beautiful.
And I believe that to be the highest. And not only the highest, but it also is what makes us find the hidden treasure. We transform the shadow, and when we transform it, there's a fragrance that comes out of it, which is truth. And that truth is what takes us back to God.
And Samah has got her hand up here, so I'm just going to bring her in and see if she's got something too.
When we're talking about mirrors, I think it's really important also, and this is something we'll be talking about in our upcoming workshop in Oxford. I think it's really important also to recognize that the whole world is a sign for people. Mirrors are everywhere, including the mirrors of beauty, kindness, and compassion that you encounter in your life. They're reflecting back to you the beauty, the love, the compassion, the kindness you carry in your own heart. I think we need to remind people of that more often, because we all tend to beat up on ourselves. I need to find my shadow. I need to find my faults. I need to find my defects to clean them. That's all very well and good. But you also have to find the beauty within yourself, because Allah gave you that. And you have to honor the gifts that He gave you. And so many of us are walking on a very thin line of self-assurance and confidence as we walk this world. So I think we need to remember that part of mirroring as well.
Yes. I have a beautiful story. I'm not sure if now's the right time to share. Actually, I will, because it's come up in my consciousness. So I'm sure there's a reason for it. I'd be very brief, though. It was during a retreat with Noura and Wujud, and Noura had led us into a zikr of Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim, or one of those names, at least. And we had break, and I went and got some tea, and somebody called Rahma asked me where I got the tea from. And my initial response was, take mine. And she said, are you sure? I said, yeah, take it. And I went and got another one. When I came back, I felt a deeper sense of compassion playing out in that relationship, in that interaction. But I didn't take ownership for it. It was a compassion from a different, from the source. And I acknowledged that. I said, this is not my generosity or my compassion. This is, maybe it's the zikr that Noura just did. So now, interestingly, Samah, you've just read my mind there, because my next quote was all about mirroring. And the context, I'll just say, is, I think it's a very important one. The Quranic verse, we shall show them our signs on the horizons and in themselves. So the outer manifestation of events, but also the inner, the afaq and the anfus. And Dr. Jaffe's mentioned how an illness can be a sign or a mirror to something that God wants to show you. And so my question would be, can you say something? And I know Dr. Jaffe has in the past told us lots of stories of how an outer event can also be a mirror. But let me just read the quote and then see what comes up. So the quote's by Byron Katie, which says, everyone is a mirror image of yourself, your own thinking coming back to you. If you want a better world, question your thoughts about the world and the people in it. End quote. Could you, Dr. Jaffe, say something about the manifestation of what Allah is trying to show you? Is it always an illness? Could it be in an event? And also on the inner planes, how does that look on the inside?
Yeah, Allah wants us to know His beauty and His magnificence, and that's not, God is not egoic. This is not an egoic knowing. He wants us to know it so we can have the experience of the greatest possibility of our lives. is a gift to us. God doesn't need us to do that. God wants us to do it so that we can know what's possible. Everything, and I mean everything that happens in this planet is a manifestation of the divine. Everything. So you can, take it up to macro levels or micro levels, but every single thing that's happening is happening through God's will. The key is that we, as human beings, have to understand what God is trying to show us through each experience, because He's hidden in that experience. He is the hidden face of the experience. So a bully comes to you and beats you up. Not a very nice thing. But behind it, God is trying to show us to be strong. And then through the strength, to realize that God is strong, and then to realize ultimately that when we're strong, we have the power to overcome the bully and every bully in our lives. That's trying to teach us through the experience. But if we turn around and we say, oh, I don't want to learn the experience, and I just run away, I'm frightened, I don't want to deal with the bully, we don't learn the experience. So God is revealing His face in every single thing that we experience at all times, if we look for it. And that's what these signs are, that God is saying, I'm showing you my signs, I'm showing you something to show you that I exist, I'm here, find me. And some of those signs are very beautiful. You see, Mount Everest, and you're looking up at the mountain, or the Grand Tetons, and Wyoming, surrounded by purple and golden light, and your mouth drops open because the beauty of it's beyond anything you've ever seen. This is a sign of God's beauty and grandeur. Other times you see, a baby dying of cancer, and you see something terrible going on, and yet behind it there is the face of Allah. You have to find it. So our work is to find God's face in every single experience that exists. And the true Sufi is one who finds it. They're finding it. And you heard the story where there was a horse or a donkey died, and people were passing it, and they were all like, oh, that's disgusting, and it smells disgusting, a terrible corpse. And then the prophet came, peace and blessings be upon him, and he looked with the eye of God, and he saw the absolute beauty of death, and the beauty of the animal in its death, and the beauty of the animal itself, and the beauty of the creation of Allah and the animal. He saw all of it. And he said, isn't the teeth of this donkey so beautiful? Isn't this beautiful? Sufi sees beauty in everything, because they find the face of God.
So just to add to that, was it funny enough, you've just touched on the next question I was going to ask. The quote by Meister Eckhart, and I guess it echoes what many Sufis say, the eye by which I see God is the eye by which He sees me. Is it possible to see God? Or what do the Sufis mean when they say that?
God reveals itself as light in the inner worlds. That's how God reveals Himself. No one really sees God, in the sense of maybe ever seeing all that God is. But God does reveal something of Himself or itself in the world of the Jabarut, and in the world of the Malakut, the soul worlds. God reveals some of His light. But to see His true light, the eye of your heart has to become His eye. In other words, when your al-basir, your quality of al-basir, is returned to Allah, so it becomes literally like Allah's sight, then through that sight you can see His light. If you haven't returned your basir to be that pure, you will not be able to see God's light. And by the way, I do have to leave shortly here. I have a class in a few minutes. It's true.
So if we just wrap up, then could you say something about the workshop in the UK you're planning to run?
Well, I at the core of it, the UK community is a very vibrant, um, extremely what's the word? Interested, sincere, honest group of people. They're sincerely wanting to know God, and they want to know love, and they want to know mercy. The UK workshop is about taking people deeper into the reality of God so that they can know the real love and the real beauty and the real peace, the real mercy, the real justice, the real freedom. That's the intent of that workshop, and we have things we'll be teaching some healing, we'll be teaching purification, we'll be teaching how to remove the veils, but the core is knowing this light of Allah, knowing this reality. And that's what that workshop will be about. How can you find this place? How can you find the hidden treasure that is God? That's what we're going to be teaching people.
Samad, would you like to add to that? I believe you'll be a co-teacher during that workshop.
Yes, and I'm honored because I've been coming back and forth to the UK for several years now to participate in these workshops. And I've fallen in love with your beautiful community there. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think the only thing I would add to what Ibrahim has already explained, the deeper aspects of the workshop, is that there is also a practical aspect of moving closer towards the unity. And it's called the path to unity. So that could mean unity that you need to create or work on in your own home, in your community, in your work, in your country. The world can certainly need more unity these days. So we'll be looking at really practical steps you can take as we walk deeper and deeper. And of course, the bottom line always is in spiritual healing and Sufi walking is to grow closer to God.
Well, on that note, I'd just like to thank you once again for your time, and I really look forward to meeting you in the UK when you're here for the workshop, and inshallah, I look forward to doing more podcasts. I just feel we've just touched the tip of the iceberg here, and I've got many, many more questions for you, inshallah.
Thank you very much, Levin. It's been really beautiful to hang out with you for this time and to see your heart. I really feel you serving the people, like you're really trying to help the people in the world to understand the depth of Sufism and what needs to be understood. So thank you for that. Appreciate it.
I mean, thank you, Saqib. You bring your beautiful light to everything you do. Alhamdulillah. Thank you.